Well, hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this beautiful overcast day, which, for many of you who work in wildfire mitigation, not such a bad thing. So today we're going to spend some time kind of doing kind of a broad cover of a lot of information. And hopefully for the first 30 minutes, I'll kind of give you what I have to present. And then we can do a Q&A session and maybe get into more of the nitty-gritty or any of the questions you all might have, especially as professionals in the sphere. So the name of today's presentation, Defensible Space Assessment Training for Wildfire Mitigation Professionals in Sonoma County, is presented to you by the Resilient Landscapes Coalition. This is a webinar. It's going to be recorded. The chat will be active, so there will be a couple times I'm going to ask you some questions, including right off the bat. I'd love to hear a little bit more about who's present, what your background is, what your role is within wildfire mitigation, and whatever you care to share. And then at the end, the Q&A, fill the Q&A box throughout, and we'll get to those questions at the end. And please, no question is a dumb question. Ask the most small kind of minutia type questions that you want, and we'll kind of pick them apart later. All right, so first I'm going to hand off to Roberta.
Hi everyone, welcome. Thanks for coming. This is part of a series we're doing. Actually a part of a curricula we've developed with the Resilient Landscape Coalition. I'm Roberta McIntyre. I'm the president and CEO of Fire Safe Sonoma. And for those that don't know me, I started in the fire service in 1980. Don't do the math, please. Spent 27 years on the rigs, on the truck company, engine company, squad, etc. Then I decided to jump into fire prevention, which I fell in love with, became a fire inspector for Santa Rosa Fire. Did that for several years. Set my sights on becoming a fire marshal, so I got my state fire marshal accreditation and started looking for the best fire marshal job in the world. And actually, I landed in the county of Sonoma, my home county. So I was the county fire marshal from 2008 until 2015. During my tenure there, I learned about Fire Safe Sonoma, fell in love with the organization, and in retirement, I still volunteer for Fire Safe Sonoma as their president and CEO. And Fire Safe Sonoma is a countywide fire safe council. We've been working in the space for 26 years now. And the focus, of course, is wildland fire safety and risk reduction countywide. With that, I'm going to kick it on over to the Habitat Corridor Project, and you guys can jump in with April, and then she can hand it off.
Hi and welcome everyone. Thanks for taking this afternoon to spend time with us. I'm April Owens and I'm the executive director of the Habitat Corridor Project. And we are a small nonprofit that does demonstration gardens and teaches about using California native plants in the landscape. I'm also trained as a landscape architect. And so in my private business, I also do a lot of fire rebuilds. And that's why we have so many good pictures of, of the 0 to 5 and defensible space. And we really play around with that in our company, April Owens Design. And so I will hand it over to Jennifer Roberts.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jennifer Roberts, and I'm a landscape designer with the Habitat Corridor Project, and I'm also an environmental educator, and I also work with the UC Master Gardener program. And I'll hand it over to Rachel with the Sonoma Ecology Center.
Hi, thanks for joining us today. I'm a project assistant for the Resilient Landscapes Coalition. I help hold Sonoma Ecology Center's portion of this wonderful coalition, for the Sonoma Ecology Center. And I will now pass it to Eric, our presenter.
Yeah, Eric Schuss, you'll hear more from me, land management planner at Sonoma Ecology Center. Really looking forward to just kind of discoursing with you all about the content that we cover. And really happy to have this whole crew with us. So we'll have a lot of knowledge, and that's where we can dive deep. I will pass it really quickly to Ellie Inslee.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us, those of you that I know and that I don't know out there. I'm one of the founding members of the Resilient Landscapes Coalition, as a representative of the Sonoma Ecology Center 5 years ago. And I'm also involved with Safer West County. I'm a landscape architect, and I specialized in habitat restoration. Yeah, back to you, Eric.
I think I'll
Yes,
go
we'll send it.
last but not least. My name is Mimi Enright. I'm the program coordinator for the UC Master Gardener program of Sonoma County. Also one of the founding members of the Resilient Landscapes Coalition. I can't believe it's been 5 years, April and Ellie, it's flown by. And we're very grateful for our longstanding partnership in doing defensible space outreach with this group and also our relationship with Fire Safe Sonoma. And I will turn it back to Eric.
Right, and that's in tandem with, of course, working with the local fire districts and departments, CAL FIRE. That's one of the beautiful things about all this content is it's vetted by the local fire folks, and we really enjoy that we can stand by that. Any other information you want to look at, check out the website, resilientlandscapescoalition.org. Right, let's see, it's not going to the next slide. There it is. Here's just a little peek into the website. We have a nice mix of different things that you might want to cover, starting from the home, working out, and then also tendingtheland.org is a new website that covers the wildlands and exterior. So deep dive into the website. All right, to the content. So first and foremost, we'll talk about what is a healthy landscape, and a lot of times the way we speak to that is fire-wise. It's also water-wise. It's really taking care of all of the different aspects of health in the environment. So we can do that with careful selection, placement, and maintenance of plants and any other materials, whether that's organic or inorganic. And we're really conscientious of the value that they provide, so the habitat services. And of course, one of those being beauty, that we all really appreciate looking at flowers. So in this picture is a great example of biodiverse and beautiful landscape. So we have like maybe an oak tree in the background, all native. So underneath that, some heuchera or fairy bells, great herbaceous ground cover, good for pollinators, and not exactly a fire risk in the same way that other small shrubs or other things might be. And on the ground, oftentimes we talk a lot about removal of fuels and things like that, but there's actually a lot of benefits to leaving leaf litter and sometimes using different mulches and things like that, because one, it can help retain water on site. It offers habitat for little small bugs and insects, and it also can break down later and give us some resources for the soil to rebuild itself. So this is a beautiful site. We'll talk a little bit more about where to use those things, such as mulch and other things that if put in the wrong place can cause issue. So quick outline: defensible space, ecology, and sustainability, followed by design and maintenance principles. And we'll touch a little bit on fire there. And then after you have that planned, then you're planting and you're maintaining. And that's a lot of, professionals in the sphere. That's a lot of what they're doing, but also being able to read what maintenance needs to be done, which is what I suspect some of you folks here are doing as you're checking out houses and things like that. So I want to cover a couple of myths and questions real quick. I think these are pervasive, and we have to make sure that we navigate around them and have the answers. So people talk a lot about, fire safety is a moonscape. I can't have any fuels around the house. And we can really avoid that by following some of the principles that I'll talk about leading after this. And it's just about, where are your plants? How well maintained are they? Do they have a ton of dead material in them, or have they been well pruned and taken care of? And we'll touch on that topic later. So don't need moonscapes, but we do want well maintained. We don't want to cut down. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, can I chime in, Eric, for a moment? just real
Absolutely.
quick? Yeah, so given that we're working on the assumption that most of our audience is people working in the home assessment or inspection field, a main point of this presentation is to show you folks in particular that with care and consideration for the landscape, you can have a very attractive, lovable landscape and still have a fire safe landscape if it's done well using natives, proper spacing, etc. In the fire service, oftentimes we've been taught, just cut it, take it out, cut it, take it out, remove the dead wood, get stuff away from the buildings, etc., make the space. But very rarely do fire service professionals or even folks out there doing the home assessments get an opportunity to learn how you can actually have a beautiful landscape and still have it be fire safe. So I just wanted to toss that in there. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Roberta. And that's a great point for like kind of the last one on the list here is just, you don't just want to cut everything out. The way that you do it does matter, and you can have a lot of value on top of just having plants. It's the mix, it's how they're spaced, that offers habitat, offers food sources, all these other things. So that's the value we're hoping to bring to you all today, and that's the surrounding questions we'd like to dive into. So a couple other real quick myths or questions is, do we have to cut down our trees? The more mature the tree, specifically, the less we want to cut it down. We really promote, if you have trees already in your defensible space, 0 to 100 feet, we do what we can to maintain them so that you don't have to remove them, and keep all their beautiful habitat services or ecosystem services functioning. And what are the best fire resistant plants? This is one I hope everyone clings on to, is there are no fire resistant plants, right? Plants burn. They're made of organic material, they burn. It's all about taking care of them and making sure that we have them in the right spaces. So some of the basic principles leading from that. We always start at the home. We're focused on saving life, saving property, and then we can also, within that realm, care for all the other critters and entities within the ecosystem. So we're starting at the home, ideally home hardening. There's resources linked on the website if you're a little more curious about that. I know the inspectors probably dive into that realm a little bit more. We'll stay in the defensible space, but definitely huge proponents. Following that, we jump into the defensible space. 0 to 5 is the ember defense zone. 60 to 90% of fires are started by embers in wildfire situations. So we want to be really conscientious of this space, doing it right. Non-combustibles in the 0 to 5 is our standard. Outside of that, we create islands of plants with non-combustible paths that helps with fuel discontinuity. So we're separating things broadly and vertically, so horizontally and vertically. Maintenance is essential. It's all about designing so putting the work in and the thought in advance to make sure that it's going to be easier to maintain, and the maintenance will basically make it continue to be fire resilient along the way. And the last part of that is hydration. We want water around, not just to hydrate plants because they're less flammable, but it also offers a water source for different insects and critters that is valuable. And this is all surrounding one of the most important concepts. I said earlier that fire people stand behind the information we're sharing, but also we generally are leading with science, and those tend to go hand in hand. But we want to make sure that we're at the forefront, cutting edge, and everything that we offer to you is backed by research. Okay, so I've been talking a lot about ecosystem services. What exactly is that? Those are just things that a healthy habitat offers us. And a lot of times we take these into account we just take these for granted is maybe a better way to say it. But all of these things allow us to exist as humans. So biodiversity, that's a big one. People hear it a lot, but we love all our little critters, our birds, our insects. All of those build on each other and support each other's existence, basically. And we stand at the top. So if we're at the top of this pyramid, we want the rest of it to be strong. And a lot of that is like the bottom layer, for instance, would be insects. And if we just had a few different insects and something came along, like a disease that killed them off, we want biodiversity because that means another group of insects will be around to fill that niche. So we're promoting biodiversity to ultimately help us stay strong at the top of the pyramid. Shade, who doesn't love relaxing in the summer when it's super duper hot under a tree? You're not going to have as many weeds there. You retain moisture, especially with leaf mass and leaf materials underneath trees. And lower temps is not just for humans, but for water too. When you're along waterways, this is a big aspect that's really supportive of salmonids and all of the critters that you might have seen this last month flowing through the creeks. Talk about soil. If we want to grow nice things, we need healthy soil. We want water to drink and also available on the land longer into the season. And we want to sequester carbon. So we're pulling it out of the atmosphere and it's ready to be used for other aspects, whether that's food source or mostly food source. So last but not least, it's not just biodiversity, period. It's really focusing on biodiversity above and below ground, because so many of the things that we rely on come from the soil. All right, here's a reiteration of that. I really just like this aesthetic. Again, it's focused on the insects. It's a really nice picture. Those plants have a reciprocal relationship with many of the decomposers and other insects, also scaling up to birds. We all love California quails, for instance. They feed off the insects, they live in the plants, mammals, all the way up. So we're thinking about them as they're burrowing underground, things like mycology and fungi and like a healthy soil habitat. Great, so how can you support biodiversity, which we've been talking about a lot? We say choose native species. They're adapted, they've been in this space for a long time. And so they know how to behave with each other. Some of you have probably dealt with, say, like broom, an invasive species, which means it's non-native and it's aggressive. So the less opportunities we leave for non-native species, the more likely we are to have a good balance in the ecosystem. We say 70 to 80%, but doesn't hurt to be 100% along the way too. We can support that. The other thing we talked about is planting islands. So you might, rather than keeping things super well spaced, you might have a clump right in the middle. It's great habitat for the California quail, like I said, or any little critters. And when you have that tight spacing, it makes it easier to have fuel discontinuity. So maybe you put a rock path around that or some pavers, just something to help separate. Integrated pest management, some of you might have heard of this before or not, but it's basically the concept like we have all of these pests and all of these dynamic issues at play. We're making sure that we're doing the best management approach, which is, okay, well, how can I manage multiple things at once, or what can I play off of each other? What aspects of this management can I play off each other to make sure that I have a healthy ecosystem? And the final one that I spoke to a little bit before is just a water source. It allows, it's water for all of the little critters as well as the plants, and helps with fire. Okay, so ecology, sustainability, kind of talked about building soil and sequestering carbon. We love mature trees. They're going to pull carbon out of the atmosphere and put it into the ground. So that's going to help with global warming, climate change, however you want to deem that, and also makes more rich soil that will support more critters. So as you can see here, a single mature tree can absorb more than 48 pounds of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And while it's doing that, it's also giving us more oxygen, which we love. So actions to support that: preserve older trees that we have, especially oaks and other trees. Oak species are a great food source. Organic matter on the property, retain it. I think a lot of times, especially with like detritus, or if you're under redwoods, people want to remove pretty much any duff. There are spaces where you want to do that, especially in the 0 to 5, but if you can retain it, it's a wonderful asset. And as you can see, organic mulch, you can kind of reinvigorate the soil if a lot of that's already been removed. It can help also stop erosion. So fire behavior, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this before. I'll be pretty quick just to point out there's 3 different ways that fire can kind of move from one space to another. Here it's ERD it's put in, but if you want, I've seen Roberta flip this around and you can say red. So radiant heat, embers, and direct flame contact. Embers just being things that burn and move ahead. Often if they're talking about a wind-driven fire, they'll have spotting fires ahead of the wind, and that's caused by the embers. As I said earlier, they're the most likely to start a house on fire, so we're really conscientious of where embers might fall and nest in place, and home hardening really helps navigate those. Radiant heat is when you're standing next to a fire, like a campfire, and you feel the heat. Generally it's coming from that, and that is an issue, especially around windows, so we have to be conscientious with that. But the one thing that particularly doing defensible space can help with is direct flame contact, making sure that there's not a direct path right up to your house. Then we get into the zones. I've talked a little about it. We go out to 100 feet for defensible space, and zone 0, most important, no combustibles, just right next to the house, 5 feet out. If you have to maintain this, usually it's cutting grass or whatever has historically been there. We really like to push putting stones and other things. April has some really great approaches to navigating this space that she could probably talk about later. Then you move out to the 5 to 30. This is the space where we're thinking about keeping things low, making sure that there's not too much fuel continuity. And if a fire is going to be fought, usually it'll start here or in the 30 to 100 foot zone. But basically, if a firefighter is going to come and save your house, like you're looking at zones 1 and 2, and making sure that there's availability or openness for them to get in there. And finally, zone 2, 30 to 100 feet. You want to be really conscientious in this zone, but you can also have some things like trees or shrubs, especially specimen species that you're maintaining well. And as we all know, sometimes people don't have a zone 2, or their zones run into each other. So it's all about working with your neighbors as we navigate these spaces, and as professionals when we talk to people about these. Okay, defensible space zone 0. As we said, ember defense zone. We basically want no materials that are going to be flammable, especially no plants under windows. It's pretty amazing how many fires also were shown, especially back in 2017, 2018, were started because the windows there was flammable materials inside the windows, and the convective heat caused issues. So we want to keep organic materials out of there. We can put hardscape, we can put stones, being conscientious of removing lawns. And if there is a wood fence, there's a couple different opportunities. Either before people leave, they should be opening the fence, or you can install a metal portion just right next to the home. Maintenance is generally, like I was saying before, for like duff and things. You would remove any debris, any clutter. Make sure that the leaves that are coming down are just left there. Especially right now, there's a liquid amber tree right outside the window for me, and there's been probably 3 rounds of cleaning up leaves already. Especially, you know, at the end of the season, you want to make sure you do that, but it doesn't hurt to continually do it, especially until we get saturated landscape, and then we don't have to worry about fire as much. And one of the last things is we talked about trees. People think about trees in the zone 0. You can have them overhanging the roof, but you just have to make sure you keep clearance of at least 5 feet from the roof, so limbed up, and then also 10 feet from any chimneys where like fuel or fire might go down in. And those particularly want to really be on the gutters and that zone 0 right next to the house, and make sure there's no burnable materials. All right, here's some examples. On the left, you can see you have low-lying, a couple of specimen shrubs. Looks beautiful. The one thing I'll note is the wire gauge there. This is from a little while ago. The wire gauge there is a little too big. We'd want it down to 3/4 inch, I believe it is. And so ideally they would cover up that under the deck area. You can see you have some like a nice little gap in the middle using pavers. And finally on the right, it used to be that so many places would do foundation plantings. They'd want, you know, live material right next to the house, and this is all about pushing away from that. So we have that good spacing. Here's some more examples of the islands. We have a pathway. We can also use horizontal spacing, like a rock retaining wall is great for avoiding fire, keeping everything hydrated. You can see in the bottom right, we have like a native grass that's called, let's see, I'm forgetting it, Carex praedicillus. And that's a nice native grass that you can keep pretty green for most of the year with a little less water. We also have a couple of other ones like what is it called? Bent grass, native bent grass that are low water, but you know, if you want to have a little place to recreate or you have kids that you want to have in that space, you can maintain it a little bit easier. In this zone from the 5 to 30, we really want smaller shrubs maxing out at 3 feet. Specimens, as I said, you can have that really nice, maybe you have this older, and ideally it's native, but maybe you have an example would be like a manzanita, and you really love it, but they can have a lot of burnable material. So you're just regularly coming back to it and making sure it's well maintained, and always checking on that spacing. All right, zone 1. Continued. So things that you can do beyond that. So you can use arbor mulch for 2 to 3 inches. It's recommended, especially for if you want to retain some moisture on the ground around certain plants. But we really recommend not using gorilla hair. It's been proven again and again to be a bed for fire, basically like an ember bed. And so we'll push back on that. Again, what I just said, trees that are pruned, and wood fences, you should always be conscientious, could catch fire and then pass the fire forward. So we're being aware of that. Other features you might see, just a nice bed of rocks that I think is supposed to be helpful for water. In the middle here is a little rain garden feature. Really big fan. It can hold water in the wet times of the year, but you don't have to worry. It usually dries out in the summer, or it could be a retaining pond as well. But a nice feature that is a stop for fire. And on the right here, you can see the use of vertical stone walls as well as the vertical path to create discontinuity, and the spacing from the house, nothing under the eaves. Okay, so now we're going to shift out, and I'll try and hurry this up because you know, things go a little bit long. There's a lot of information to cover. We're going to shift out to the next zone. Again, it's all about spacing. It's about managing your plants. Larger plants and groupings are good. As you move out, you can have taller trees, you can have larger shrubs. That's okay. You want to make sure that your pathways are split with a large enough gap for, I'll talk about spacing and flammability in the next few slides, but you just want to make sure you have a little more spacing to act as a fire break. We can use mulch here. And again, keeping up on your maintenance. Wood piles can be left here, but you should be conscientious about those, and we could talk more if people have questions. Here's an example of a nice kind of island planting. Islands can get pretty big. We don't have specific sizes for them, but we just like to make sure that the pathways on the sides of them are significant. They offer a nice little habitat oases. Great, so here's just a real quick, what can you use in between? I talked about pavers. You can use gravel. So use those in all zones, in swales, which is another word for the rain garden that we just showed before, just a larger feature. Irrigated grasses, all zones, as we said. You want to make sure they're maintained. You have good water fixture. And then arbor mulch is outside of the first 2 zones. Generally, you're working in the 3rd zone. You can go up to 2 to 3 inches, as long as it's not gorilla hair. All right, timing's everything. Think about plants, or think about birds as you're going. Nesting season is generally from March to August, but if you care about northern spotted owls and you're in an area where it's redwoods, especially, push a little bit sooner that you want to stop. Maybe January. They say February in the literature, but just go out the morning of, before you're going to do work, 7 a.m. and just see if you see any birds that are acting interestingly. Maybe they're guarding, maybe they're making noise, maybe you see an active nest, maybe they're moving nesting materials. Just good to be aware of them they're some of our favorite little neighbors, so we want to take care. If you do find an active nest, highly recommend putting off the work or avoiding working within, a set distance of that, usually at least 100 feet. Depends on how big your yard is, of course. Okay, so maintenance, as I've already said, continually clean up the clutter and debris. Keep the organic mulch away from the root collar or the trunks of the trees and fences, because you don't want direct fuel continuity, and you don't want to smolder on top of root systems. It'll damage the trees. All about spacing, hydration, thinning. So there's a couple different ways to maintain plants. I just want to show on the left here, for certain species, and we can talk more about this at the end in the Q&A, you can really cut them back hard. You can coppice them, as we would say. So you can see here on the left, in the fall, this plant's kind of taking off. It got coppiced back really hard during the winter, and then the next year it was back just beautiful. So knowing how to approach plants and what that looks like is really valuable, especially if you're working in the landscaping sphere. But you can also, if you work in any sort of inspection or things like that, you can recommend how to manage these plants. Here's another example of that. You have the thing, it says tree to be coppiced. Usually it's a shrub. You cut it back to the base, starts growing back, and it's ready to go again pretty quickly here. The other thing is people hedge a lot. Hedging can be problematic. It kind of creates a lot of internal growth, and you get this just like bunch of half dead material and incredibly flammable. I think of it as like a torch. The difference being you could do thinning. So we have a great example here where things are growing up, and someone went through in the third picture and did a good job of removing the upper branches, kind of removing the capacity for that to burn as easily. And that would be an example of great management and maintenance. And the bottom right picture shows the difference. Spacing, I said I was going to talk about this. On flat slopes, we'll talk about first. You want to make sure that you have at least 2 times the distance of the height between plants. So if you have a shrub that's 3 feet, you want it to be 6 feet from another flammable object. As you increase the slope, that continues to increase. So if you're on a slope of 20 to 40 degrees, whatever the height is, you want 4 times the distance. If it was a 2-foot height, you want 8 feet between it and the next thing. So we can share out the slides later. So if you want to make sure you have these designations for how distant they should be, we can talk about that. And anything else? Oh, biggest thing too is we don't want to just clear out the ground. So that's why we talk about using mulches. We talk about keeping ground covers. It's more about vertical height that's important. So in zone 1, especially 5 to 30 feet, we do want covering. We just want them to be short, and we can be really conscientious about that. Vertical spacing, we just talked about horizontal. Now we're on vertical. Vertical is generally 3 times the height of whatever is flammable on the ground, which we would deem probably a ladder fuel oftentimes. Anything that's 3 times the height of that. So if you had a 2-foot shrub, on top of that, you'd want 6 feet of spacing. So it would actually be 8 feet total between the lowest limb and the ground, but 3 times the distance from the top of that, the lowest branch and the top of the vegetation. And that's just a caution, because we really want to not let the fire get up into the canopy. A tree that's canopy burns is most likely going to die. And as we said before, we want to retain those mature trees. Here's an example, thanks to Ellie's photos here. You can see this tree had materials directly underneath it. Looked pretty ugly, probably pretty flammable. And then they were able to retain the vegetation, the shrub, and keep some of that ecosystem service while removing its risk from the tree being right next door. So that was a great job. We talked a lot about plant selection. It's all about the right plant, right place. When you're first approaching a site and you're just designing it, really just be conscientious of how big something's going to grow and what it's going to look like long term. That can help you forget about a lot of, or maybe can help you not feel so much regret later on. You can feel a little less stressed. So yeah, thinking how large it'll grow, where's it going to thrive actually and provide good habitat or good services. Depending on the plant, how much maintenance does it take, and is it native or non-native / invasive? Here's a great example of a good individual specimen. It's a nice manzanita, well maintained. It's got distance from the ground. Underneath it is short, relatively short vegetation. The one thing we can note is, so this is well done, but if you look in the background, you do see that shrub right up next to the tree. That's an instance where they're doing some things right, but maybe we would want to have them either trim that brush or shrub, I should say, in the background, or completely remove it. It's always kind of, it depends, but just noting those things is really valuable. So yeah, some wonderful options that we talk to is plant selection matters. We have some beautiful natives. You've probably seen them around. Highly support them. They usually use less water, offer more food and habitat resource for our native species as well, and can be very beautiful. So yarrow, monkey flower, generally sticky monkey flower. Sometimes you'll see seep monkey flower, eriogonums or buckwheats, and plenty of different asters that are just gorgeous. All right, I'm finished. I'm a little bit late. I appreciate your patience, everyone. But the Resilient Landscape, on behalf of the Resilient Landscapes Coalition, we thank you for showing up. Love to open up the Q&A session. I haven't been able to look at the chat, but hopefully y'all have some questions in there and we can kind of just delve into them. And I will lean on my cohorts here to help us decide what questions to ask or what questions to answer.
So no questions in the Q&A yet. So please, anybody, if you have any questions, don't hesitate. You can put those in the Q&A. And we're happy to answer any questions you have in the remaining time we have for this session.
Yeah, we're here for it. It can be pretty out there.
Looks like we just got a question in the Q&A if somebody wants to handle it. I'll just toss it out.
Yeah, go
In
for it.
designing defensible space using these tips of native plants and plant diversity, what do you suggest for a homeowner who wants minimal maintenance, less plants overall, or a smaller amount of species of plants?
Do you want to take a stab at that, April?
Do you want to take
I'm
that,
happy to
April?
answer that. I was
Yeah,
waiting for
so
Jen or
we're talking low maintenance plants, you guys.
yeah.
Is there such a thing?
I think aesthetically, I think using native plants are going to be lower maintenance than using non-native plants, but it's also that right plant, right place kind of situation. So make sure you know your plants. I think that that's more important than having less plants or smaller amounts of species of plants. Aesthetically, you want, if you want a simple, like kind of modern or more modern garden, you want like less different species of plants, but bigger groupings. And that's really great for habitat too. It just depends on what you're trying to find in the garden. Anybody else have thoughts on that?
So I'll say that we do, the recommendation is that you focus more on perennial plants rather than woody plants in your zone 1. Which is your 5 to 30 foot zone, and those can be more maintenance intensive. And then you can use some, specimen or individual trees or shrubs is the recommendation in that area. So yeah, I'd say from a maintenance perspective, maybe you want to not have a ton of different species of plants that may have different maintenance requirements. That you might want to, scale down the number of species you have. That can maybe help reduce your maintenance. Perennials are generally pretty fast and easy to cut back and rejuvenate this time of year. So they're not too maintenance intensive. I don't know about others, but I have a small, like little native grass meadow area, but then that means this time of year, I've got to be out there cutting those back to rejuvenate those this time of year. So I'm personally looking at reducing the number of grasses I have in my landscape. So because also it can just brutalize your hand when you're cutting those and you have a lot to cut. So personally, that's one of the focuses I have in my garden to help reduce.
And there's also a website, the website calscape.org. is a really great resource, and there's a lot of information on maintenance. So maybe like think about your plant selections and then look at what the maintenance is for those plants for the future.
Yeah.
Jim, any other thoughts you have for weighing in on this?
Yeah, my experience as not necessarily the plant subject matter expert in the room, I'm more of the fire professional perspective, but the more diverse the plant, the more maintenance it feels like to me, or plantings. The farther you get away from natives, it feels like the more maintenance you're gonna have. And then, of course, the more, things you have out there, the more you're gonna need to maintain. I personally don't have a lot of time for maintenance, so I'm looking at in my yard California fescue and some things like that that are natives, but really low maintenance. The poppies, I love poppies. I think huckleberry is a native, I think. Yeah. So those are kind of what I've got going on in my yard.
I think Ellie had some input there.
Yeah, I have a sort of a medium-sized front garden, and I've been kind of wrestling with this question. And what I find is that it's not necessarily the fewer plants, but the fewer plants that need the same kind of maintenance, the better off you are. So some of the perennials, you can just sort of cut them all at once in the fall. But I also, if it's maintenance compared with what, like lawn maintenance, where you have to irrigate and then you have to mow like once a week or whatever, some of these gardens that we're talking about, you would need to spend a few hours of pruning a couple of times a year. So just, thinking about what you're comparing it to. Well, if you're comparing it to a front yard full of, juniper or something that just can grow and grow and grow without any water, that's one thing, but it's also, likely to burn your house down eventually, which, becomes a big project to rebuild. So there's that, sort of risk maintenance. But one thing I did want to mention is I have planted some low growing manzanita, which does not take a lot of maintenance and covers the ground pretty well after a year or two, a couple of years. And then I've also used and April and I've worked together coffeeberry, so there are a couple of shrubs and ground covers that can actually fill in the space that don't need a lot of maintenance. So it's kind of having a balance of things that don't require a lot of maintenance that might be a little bit woody, along with some of the herbaceous perennials that need a little more maintenance but create a whole lot of beauty and are also very well hydrated and less woody. So kind of a complicated answer, but it's not that simple.
Yeah. Just like all things, there's always a balance between kind of biodiversity and health and work involved. So thank you all for those answers. One of the questions here I wanted to answer quick is, can we have someone walk a property? This format's not exactly, specifically an effective way for them to communicate. We do have some funding to come out and do site visits. We're interested in that. It's a valuable experience. And we would be, reach out to us, basically. We'd be happy to discuss that with you.
And then one I'll grab real quick, since it is in my wheelhouse, is enforcement when neighbors don't care. Who is responsible for enforcement? It depends on where you live. So the question is fire department question, and yes, fundamentally for fire safety, the fire department is responsible, and it could be your local fire district who's taking care of that enforcement, or it could be CAL FIRE if it's unincorporated. Or also if it's unincorporated, it could be county fire, the county fire warden, and with responsibility. So in a perfect world, all these entities, and again, if you're in a city, it'd be city, your city fire department. So in all these scenarios, you know, the relationship between all of those organizations is key. So there's not a lot of overlap, but sometimes you just can't help some overlap. So my recommend is just find out who your fire department, who responds to fire calls to your house, and they would be the first place to check about enforcement.
So I actually, there's a really great question here that I was hoping to touch on right away. For someone in the low income demographic, what would be the first steps in creating a resilient landscape? So certainly there can be, this is like information that should be used by renters and full spectrum people who work on the land, etc. As someone who doesn't own their own house as well, a lot of the work that I've done is just, if I can't do anything else, at least doing the maintenance that we talk about. It's trimming and making sure there's not dead material, clearing out that 0 to 5 zone. That could be if there's grass there or other weeds and stuff. It's hand pulling or weed whacking. Obviously, be careful if there's rocks in there and you're weed whacking near the windows. I've ran into an experience before where I may or may not have hit a window. But yeah, so it's just doing the really basic things that just take a little bit of labor, usually don't cost the most, which that's kind of how I've been approaching it in the past too. If anyone else wants to add to that.
Mimi, could you talk about your plant sense program?
Oh, sure. Thanks for the plug, April. We so our Master Gardener program has a 10-year partnership with the Sonoma Water Agency. And you can go to the Master Gardener website here in Sonoma County and request a home visit, and a pair of Master Gardeners can come out and make specific recommendations for you based on your site conditions at your home, and recommend low water use, including many native plants for you to install. So if you don't have the money to hire a landscape designer, it's certainly not of the scale or level of what a landscape designer would do for you, but it certainly can give you some ideas of what you can do in your home landscape. They have the training in resilient landscaping, so they do incorporate it in the different defensible space zone requirements and considerations. So please avail yourself of that service if that's of interest to you. And just echoing what Eric said, I would agree. I think the first thing you want to do is create your 0 to 5, especially if you're in a higher fire severity zone. That's your most important place to start, and then hopefully maybe you can start integrating in some native plants to create more biodiversity and habitat support in your home garden.
Nice, Mimi, thanks. And I don't know if Roberta, I know there's a few different programs out there depending on where people live for possible reimbursements. I don't know if you wanted to speak to any of those, or maybe they're not active now, but.
There's one in West County covering the communities of Monterey, Occidental, Camp Meeker, and Forestville. And if you live in any one of those areas, just reach out to check out the Safer West County website and go to their grants page, and you'll see we have a couple of two elements of a project we're running out there that'll go for one more year till the end of next year. One is a free chipper service in those communities, and the other that you're alluding to, Eric, is the project is offering up to $1,000 rebate money for your contractor to do work on your property. So it's a 1/3 match with $1,000 max award through the project.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Roberta. And there are other programs in the works. I don't know of any that are necessarily active now, but there is funding and interest in making these services available especially for defensible space. So if you want to, reach out to us and we'll see what we can link you into. So the next question, Kelly asked us, what landscaping and/or plants do you recommend for areas of high traffic? That could be kids or animals.
And I could start the discussion, and hopefully people will have more ideas. Some of the product that Eric showed in his in its great presentation. There are not like native California native turfs that you can buy that are lower water use that are really wonderful, and they can even survive years where we have to turn off irrigation. So that's a nice place to start. They're a little pricey. So looking at some of the lower the grasses that can turn into a lawn. So maybe, trying some of those kinds of things. I think calscape.org actually has a place where you can plug in like kids and ground cover and get some ideas there. There are some great ground covers. There's one called Stipa, or no, it is Phyla Nata Flora, is a ground. I can't think of the common name right now. But it's a ground cover that's great, native to California, that's great for butterflies. And it's walkable and runnable for kids. I do find that it has like it's a great pollinator plant, so you do get bees on it. So it, sometimes isn't the safest thing for kids too. So really looking at your ground covers that can tolerate foot traffic. Any other folks have ideas about that?
No, I think you hit on some really great options and recommendations there, April, and it's the Phyla Nata Flora goes by Lipia or Carapia.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. I could not.
Though apparently it's also native to Texas and it goes by Texas frog fruit.
Yeah, so it's a funny name, and you just need to make sure that so another thing we didn't really talk about is where you buy your plants. So it's important to buy your plants if you're looking at natives from local nurseries that have some controls for some diseases that are going around. And so I highly recommend going to Calflora Nursery in Sonoma County in Fulton and asking, when you ask for the Lipia, make sure it's the California native one, because there is one from Africa as well. So it's another story that we didn't get to talk about, but just to understand your plant and know that the common names of a lot of plants are go for a lot of different plants, and you want to really like understand where your plant comes from again and look it up. And
Definitely, yeah, and there are nurseries that sell invasive species.
yes,
to this day. So really being conscious to check out Calscape to get a little better idea of not only if it's native or not, but also where does it grow well and what's going to fit well within your landscape. It's kind of fun. I think of it as kind of like collecting your little palette of information and almost like Pokemon, and then you can play it out on the ground. So
looks like Ellie has a comment.
yeah, go ahead, Ellie.
Yeah, I was just browsing Calscape while we were talking, and I was noticing something that I think everybody will see when they start looking into some of these websites, that they haven't gotten the memo about the 0 to 5 zone, and a lot of the images you'll see will show mulch and plants, sort of standard foundation planting all the way up to your house. So just beware of that, we really are promoting this idea of being, having the zone 0 where you are keeping the ember free zone. And I'm also looking at David Watt's question, which is coming up the next one. And I think it's a wonderful, wonderful question about, is there a difference between a azalea under a maple versus, so there are some plants that might burn quicker and hotter than others, but as we've said, all plants will burn. So even that azalea can actually burn the Japanese maple. However, it is also, the reason I love this question is that it really gets to the nuance of some of of our individual gardens and also our sense of risk, which, people have to decide for themselves. I mean, if you're in a high fire hazard severity zone and you have azalea growing really close up against a Japanese maple, you probably will want to prune it out and prune it down and get that spacing, because the problem with ladder fuels is that it will bring a fire up higher up into the canopy and into the wind zone, and it will then throw embers farther. So, you want to just keep everything as clean and as close to the recommendations as possible. And of course, we all promote native plants, so you could get native azaleas and then of course, you might want to keep your Japanese maple, but, look for native plants to surround them. And I had to throw that plug in for natives. Of course, it's wonderful to have azaleas and Japanese maples, and you don't want to get rid of them if they're your heritage plants.
Yeah, the other caveat I want to add to that, Ellie, is you kind of touched on it, but I want to expand on it a little further. And that is that regardless of the plant that's there, if a code official is doing the inspection, they're likely going to be using the multiplier, height of shrub, 3 times under the crown, etc. And that would apply in areas where where the code legally applies, like in a WUI area. Outside of a WUI area, I would agree, just go with how you feel, but keep risk in mind. And then that's something that I think that the home assessor should be aware of, that, there are distinctions to be made between what the code requires in certain geographies versus what may still be a reduction in risk at the same time. So just a thought there.
Nice. The other thing too is some shrubs, if you can create discontinuity between them and the ground, you can almost treat them like a tree. So as long as there's the discontinuity between the lowest fuel and the next level up, it might not always be a ladder fuel.
Yeah.
Just being conscientious of that too. You could limb up some of these shrubs and they'll be way less risky.
As long as the shrubs have been pruned and thinned in a way that they're not actually a torch themselves.
I was in a presentation yesterday. CAL FIRE basically said, what we worry about is the understory, the ladder fields, and the surface fields. Kind of those 3 buckets.
Makes sense. They think about things burning.
So
There's a
then,
good question that links up to that right below there, about the waxy plants being a fire hazard. I had never heard of wax myrtles being a fire hazard, and I just looked them up on Calscape, and they natively grow like along the coast, which is a wetter kind of environment. So we didn't really talk a lot about the plant communities, but I think just because the common name says wax myrtle, I don't know that it's necessarily a plant to worry about. Some of that waxiness does go with drought tolerance. So it's the plant protecting itself from drought. So that's that balance that you can have. You never want large shrubs 5 feet for your house no matter what, but you can dot larger shrubs around your landscape. Wax myrtle is an amazing habitat plant. So I'd be careful with some of that terminology, and maybe Roberta could speak to that too.
Yeah, sorry, I was
Not being scared of plants, like we need to understand our plants and not just their name.
absolutely, yeah, it's all about reducing risk, getting risk. There's a couple of moving parts here. It's about me being in compliance with the code at the same time. Beyond that, it's further reducing your risk to a comfortable level that doesn't break the bank or break your back. So there's a balance there you're trying to get to, I think.
Yeah. The one other thing that kind of ties into this and a question down the way is, it is good to look these plants up. Some of them do have more volatile oils, things like that. But just as you saw, April was like, hey, I just looked on Calscape quick to learn a little bit more about this plant. Because as much as we live and work in this sphere, we don't know everything there is to know. However, Calscape or another website similar is going to give you an idea of where you might want them and where you may not. That's what I was trying to say. Go ahead, Ellie.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to be careful about common names like wax myrtle, because my experience, I do have a lot of that plant I have a larger property, and I don't think those leaves are particularly waxy. And then you look at a coast live oak, which, as April said, a lot of California native trees actually have that kind of like a waxy looking coating, but it's actually just a kind of a shiny coating that helps keep the plant from transpiring too much water. And so it's a really good adaptation, and it's a great tree for habitat and various other purposes, and it's not considered a fire hazard tree. So, and I've always been a little concerned even about the volatile, like the volatile compounds that make the plants actually very aromatic, such as certain California sages, salvias, and they're actually not considered to be fire hazardous. So when you start getting into like plants not to plant and some that are better, what you want to stay away from is the really twiggy plants with very, very fine leaves. And, bamboo is one of them. There are a number of plants, native and non-native, that you want to stay away from that will be more likely to catch fire because of the shape of the plant. Now you can prune those plants in a way that will make them work better, but that does require some maintenance. And in any case, a well-hydrated, well-pruned plant is going to be much better than one that you've just left and not watered, and then it's going to be more of a fire hazard.
Great. Yeah, thanks for sharing your knowledge, Ellie. So we're actually past time. So I'm gonna wrap things up. There is one more question that I would leave open to the folks about FOS.
Yeah, I was going to ask that real quick before I
Maybe
jump.
we can answer quick and then we'll finish up.
Do you mind if I answer that one real quick?
No, please do. Yeah.
Okay, so the material we're talking about, it is great for pre-fire treatment. In an ideal situation, it could be applied by vehicle or other apparatus in front of a wildfire. The other application would be as a defense, not an offensive material, basically, where you could apply it seasonally, but just keep in mind it does have a shelf life. So once you apply it, as soon as you get a significant rain, it's all going to wash off, and the material properties are going to be gone, and so you'd have to do it again. So in front of a fire, great. In front of a fire season, probably not too bad, but in my opinion, it would have to be applied seasonally for any, real effect.
Yeah, and just for those, I don't know if the participants can see the questions or not, but basically the question was, there's a fire retardant called FOS Check by FosGuard, and according to the material safety data sheet, it doesn't harm animals, plants, or birds.
Oh, thanks for asking that. I forgot
And
to
I
say
would,
that.
since we have fire professionals here, I mean, the second part of the question was, my neighbors have a lot of ladder fuels and have not worked on defensible space. I think having an inspector out would probably be a really good idea. They're very friendly, and maybe you could suggest to your neighbor, or kind of get somebody out there to help with more understanding about that.
Yeah, and then the other more expensive option would be on that elevation of your house. Certainly do some robust structural hardening, if you can't convince your neighbors to do the right thing.
And
And
if the anonymous attendee would like to, tell us who they are, we could probably put them in touch with somebody who could do a walk around, because I think that same person asked for some kind of a walk around.
Eric, when did we throw our email into the chat?
Right.
And then
I'm going to jump, you guys. I'm late for another meeting. So
thanks, everybody.
thanks for attending.
Thanks everyone for joining.
Before we go, there is a question about junipers. I mean, if some of us need to go, but the question about junipers, fire on a stick, or eucalyptus, do we want to answer that? I mean, I have a couple of comments.
I'll jump in real quick before I jump off, if that's okay. If you open up a juniper and look inside, you're going to freak out because it's all dry wood underneath. It's basically an ugly piece of dead wood with a costume on the outside, impersonating, a very pretty tree. That's my opinion about junipers. I'll leave it there. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
I've done an experiment with juniper that was hosted by a master gardener. I'm forgetting his name, down in Marin, but you can actually prune up a juniper. Certain junipers you can do this way, and then just get rid of all of the dead stuff and have pom-poms on the end. I have some juniper on my property that house quail at certain times of year, but I have it so sequestered that it's never going to cause a problem. But it is very, very, very flammable because of the dry dead stuff underneath it. And eucalyptus can be a real problem because it's shredding and shedding its bark. But eucalyptus, if they're well maintained, can also be okay if they're, as long as they're not a hazard on your land.
Well, and I will say there's a really lovely California native ground cover juniper. So I mean, we try not to vilify a specific plant, but you know, typical junipers you may see in a landscape were probably planted in the 1960s. They're probably not irrigated. They do tend to develop all that dead debris and buildup on the interior. You know, which in addition to, you know, maybe their oilier characteristic, I think make them much more flammable. So, you know, I think it is all about balancing and understanding how you're maintaining a plant, where it's placed, and again, to Eric's point, what risk level you're willing to take on.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's going to be it for anyone. If you were if you were anonymous or you want to reach out to us, please resilientlandscapescoalition@gmail.com. We love to chat with people. We are also interested in doing site visits, things like that. So please reach out. Otherwise, thank you all. Thanks for spending time with us and engaging. And we love to have groups like y'all.
Thanks for a great presentation, Eric.
Yeah,
Thanks, everybody.
Adios.
Have a good holiday season.